Welcome to the Wellness Connection podcast with Fiona Kane. My name is Fiona Kane. I'm your host. And today my guest is Pete Solway. Hi, Pete.
Hey Fiona, great to be here.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. For those who don't know you, who are you? Big
Who am
question,
I? That's
starting
a
with
big
really big
that's a big
questions.
question. I might start by answering what it is that I do with my business, because it is a big part of my life,
Yes.
and it's a meaningful part of my life. So I go into small businesses and help work with founders to help them scale their sales approach beyond themselves. Right, like if they've kind of figured out, how to sell what it is that they're selling. How do they bring on a salesperson? How do they build a sales team? How do they get some of their technical service, consultants or whatever to start, getting involved in the sales process? What does that look like? I've been that first sales hire. I've lived that journey. I've been the founder, those sorts of things. So I really enjoy helping founders that are in that situation, because I've been both in the salesperson shoes as well as the founder shoes. And so, I get in there and help that journey, which is super cool. Otherwise, look, I'm a guy who likes sports, keeps me entertained on a Saturday. I say Saturdays for sport. I'm into health and wellness, and had a bit of an interesting journey, running through running my own businesses and things over the years. So I'm sure we'll dive into a little bit more about what that looks like as we go through today's chat.
Yes. Well, I failed at the beginning to sort of mention what the topic was today, but as this is a health and wellness podcast, there's a bit of a clue there. We've had a discussion before and we talked a little bit about burnout and about how that affected you. So that's exactly why I have you here today, because I think it is really important to share these messages. So, can you please tell me a little bit about your burnout story?
Well, it's not a story; it's two stories.
Okay.
I've done it twice. The
Well,
first,
you've got to do these things well.
yeah, that's
I like
it.
to say I'm
That's
a bit
it.
of an overachiever. I like to, if you're going to do it really well.
Yeah, 100%. Well, it's interesting. The second time was very different to the first,
Yeah.
and I'll talk through that. The first time was young, ambitious me going after what I wanted. Was building a business, was working 60+ hours a week. Had a lot of pressure on us from investors and things like that. And I was young too, right? Like I was out and partying and with whatever time I had and being social and those sorts of things.
Mm,
And I hit this point, it all kind of hit me at once, right? Like I'd kind of found a bit of a rhythm to my, chaotic, full on lifestyle.
mm,
Um, and one of the promotions we did, we ran it at schoolies on the Gold Coast for a couple of weeks. I was up there, like, promoting our app on the streets of schoolies, and like coming back to my hotel room and talking to investors and running operational things and things. And it was really intense. Like I was just getting by on coffee and those sorts of things for the fortnight. Um, I left and I literally remember getting home, um, with some pretty good results from the couple of weeks, actually, right? Like I was happy with what we'd done and we'd achieved,
mm,
but it was like it was a lot. Like I was like, oh, geez, I'm tired. I
mm.
got home, I couldn't get out of bed for a week. It's like,
Wow.
what is this? Like,
Mm,
like I can barely, sit in bed and play with a few, financials in Zero or something.
mm,
Like let alone go into the office and talk with the team and like do stuff. Like I was physically, emotionally, mentally exhausted.
mm.
I was like, this isn't right. Something, something's got to change.
Yeah,
Something's got to
something's very
shift.
wrong. Mm,
Um, and it was a slow process from there, because I hadn't experienced like proper burnout before. I was an athlete growing up, tried to go professional with tennis and things like that. I was on the junior tour, and I'd experienced tiredness and working hard and those sorts of things. But always given myself adequate time for recovery, because that's promoted in sport. You understand that that's just the nature of it, right? But when you're going hard as a small business owner, it wasn't something I'd sort of come across before.
mm,
Anyway, I remember telling my mom, I was like, "Hey, can you buy me like some health retreat or something? Like you've kind of done some of that kind of stuff. That kind of sounds like it might be what I need."
mm,
Um, and I ended up going on one, and that kind of started my right, like there's some stuff I can do to support myself here. Like right now, like I didn't end up, reducing my working hours for probably 6 or 9 months, but
mm,
to my detriment. But at least I started putting some things in place, right? Reduced the partying, got into yoga, started thinking about, well, how do I look after myself? How do I actually find a place where I'm happy and I'm enjoying what I'm doing, not just I'm chasing the goals.
It's good that you had enough insight to even know, okay, there's something missing.
Yeah.
So it was good that you at least you knew you had to start. You asked your mum. That was good that you at least knew. Okay, yeah, there's some things I'm missing here. I'm going to go and find out what they are. So that was great. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Got a problem, got to fix it. That's how I look at the
Yeah,
world,
yeah, but
but
sometimes
life
people
as
kind of
well.
stay stuck. They stay stuck in it, you know.
Mm,
They kind of think, oh, there's nothing I can do about it. Let's just get on with it, you know. So just the fact that you stopped and sort of, well, you know, and I think it is men in general, where they're problem solvers. So so maybe it's like you put your problem solver hat on, and it's like what to do.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that definitely. But it was really a slow process, right? Like I said, I
Mm,
didn't reduce the work hours for 6 to 9 months. Um, there was a lot of factors that were playing out there, and I kind of had it in my head once I did leave the business and was like, "Cool, I'll take a bit of time off and look for what I do next." I kind of thought it would just stop,
yes.
like I just feel better.
Mm,
And weeks started going by, and I was like, I don't feel better. I went to
mm,
Bali for a few weeks. I came back, felt a little bit better. I was like, what's happening here? Like, what's
mm,
going on for me? What is this? Like, why aren't I just like firing on all cylinders again? Like, I took a moment's break, and then I come to realize that it was like, hey, I've not just like been tired. I've burnt myself out. Like, I've gone too hard for too long. And I think what exacerbated it, right, was really the emotional kind of element to it, right? Like that feeling of pressure. We had investors,
mm,
business partners, like team members. Like there was a lot of like my self identity caught up in the whole thing. And so I think the emotional part, like there was the physical put in this many hours equals tiredness, you
mm,
know, then pushed self to, enjoy life and be social and all those things. But it's like I feel like there's an intensity to the hours that you work, right? Like, and that isn't always factored in when you're looking at your overall like wellness, and things like that. I remember talking to a mentor of mine later on who said to me, he worked at Microsoft,
mm,
previously to working with me in a different company, and he said, "Oh yeah, like I would work more hours at Microsoft, but this takes more out of me." Right, like this early stage business, the pressures, like the stresses, it's like when those things are going on, so that like emotional toll mixed with the volume of work is something to, I think, be really cognizant of. Quite often it's like hours of work equals how tired you should be, and it's like, no, actually it's different for every individual, particularly how long you've
yes.
been doing it, the intensity of it. Like if there's challenging emotional things, or if it's just business as usual and you've decided this is something that's really important to you and you're working a bunch of hours because it's what's important and meaningful to you, and you've got capacity in your life for that.
I've seen
Um,
that a lot in the last few years. I know I've experienced it myself, and I talk to many business owners, and the last few years, because of the whole COVID stuff, um, so many businesses that we've been struggling financially. And when you have staff and when you are responsible to, like you said, whether it's investors or whether it's staff members or whoever it is, and
mm,
you feel like they're going through a really hard time and you feel the response, that weight of having to look after them when you can barely look after yourself. You're absolutely right. That level of, it's one thing to have the work hours. That's one thing, but it's a whole other thing when you're just carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders that whole time, that emotional weight, and that kind of, how am I going to do the wages this week? How am I going to cover the insurances? How am I going to pay the invoices before people stop delivering goods or whatever it is that you do? It is major. I think that it is really underestimated, the fatigue and the energy and the strain that emotional stuff puts on you, besides all the other stuff that's happening in life anyway. But
yeah.
when you run your own business, there's a lot of the weight on your world, or on the
Mm,
world, on your shoulders.
100%.
Mm.
100%. It's interesting you talk about, COVID times and that sort of effect, because that's actually what led me to the second burnout. I was very
Um,
conscious after the first one. I was like, no, I don't want to do that again. I set my life up I limited myself to working only 40 hours a week for the next year to give myself that time to recover and everything. And then I decided to, really dive in, emotionally invest and financially invest in the business, the next one that I was getting involved in. And One of my things was like, I don't want to go into burnout again. I want this to be like I actually enjoy what I do. Like I love working, and I want to keep loving it.
Yeah.
And how do I do that? And I feel like I did it for a decent portion of time, right, in that business. But we hit this point going into COVID. We had two other sales team members. I was sort of the lead sales team member. I was bringing in about 75% of the revenue in the business at the time. I'd been on a lot longer, right? So fair enough. But we come into COVID, things are changing in the business. They kind of got let go. I needed to step up and try and cover, the revenues that they were bringing in on top of what I was currently doing. We had some internal shifts around, leadership in the business as well, which became sort of quite stressful. And we kind of hit this point where it was like, where I realized I'm like, it's coming on. Like, to get through this, I'm probably gonna go through burnout. Like I kind of know that I know where my limits are, and I've been keeping my boundaries strong. But it's like this isn't this isn't sustainable. That like what I'm stepping up to do right here. And I remember having a moment where I like noticed it coming on, and I was like, I have a choice here. I have a choice. I can either choose to walk away from this business, or I can choose to go into burnout and probably get us through it. So at least this time I had a conscious choice around
Yeah.
it. um, and I decided to go into the burnout. I was like, look, I'm going to go hard for this period of time. I'm going to get us through this COVID phase. I'm going to figure
Mhm.
out, this sales stuff, to keep the business going, hit the numbers that I need to make this business work. Like I was a shareholder in the company,
Mhm.
so I was quite motivated to do so. And I made that conscious decision.
Mm.
I've got a fair few thoughts about it in retrospect. But the things that I started to notice, right, it was that like sleep was probably the first thing. Like my sleep was really starting to get affected, like time to get to sleep, waking up at odd hours, like even not necessarily with things on my mind, just like my system was struggling to wind down.
Mm. Yeah, you're
And
sort
it's
of
like,
wired,
yeah,
in that kind of wired mode where you can't quite settle.
Yeah, wired,
Mm.
and the emotional side of it too is I went from like feeling like I was in a tough but supportive environment, and some
Mm.
leadership things had changed, which meant that I went to feeling like I was alone and kind of being used,
Mm.
like being used for my ability to bring revenue in. And it was like, that's your responsibility. You figure it out, and we'll just take for granted that you're just going to do whatever it takes to bring in whatever revenue we need, right? And
Yes.
it's like, I accepted that for a period of time. I accepted that for too long,
Mm.
right? Like I definitely stayed in that business longer than I should have,
Mm.
but I don't necessarily regret that choice to stick around for a period of time and go into the burnout and save the company, because it was something that was meaningful to me at the time.
Mm.
Um, I was single. I had the ability to go into that. I learnt tons, right? Like the intensity of everything that was going on there. It's allowed
Mm.
me to build the business that I'm running today, which is way more sustainable. I don't work too many hours. Like I'm earning great money. It's just a whole
Mm.
different sort of step change from where I was.
Mm.
Um, but the hard thing is when you're in burnout is like, when do you pull yourself out? Like you just
Mhm.
you're in that like desperation sort of mode, and you don't know like where's the end of the, like I made my first conscious decision, but then like I made my decision to leave, but I stuck around for 6 months to set up all the systems and processes so that everything, it was like, man, I was done. Like
Mm.
I stuck around probably 6 to 9 months at least, too long.
Yes.
That meant that my burnout recovery journey was huge. Like, turns out I'd picked up a parasite while I was living in Singapore at the time. So my gut had all sorts of problems with it that I just thought was burnout. So even after I, took the time off, like there was all of these different things I had to put in place to sort of bring myself back. So
Mm.
it's not something I recommend sort of going through. At least the second time, it was a conscious choice, and there was something meaningful to me personally.
Mm.
Um, but I couldn't see where that end of the tether was, which to me is the real risky point. When you're in that desperate, just do whatever it takes mode, you kind of can't
Mm.
see with the peripheries of just how much it's affecting your life, and then the knock on, right? It's
Yes.
like 2 years of burnout, a year of recovery. That's kind of what, like the formula, if you will, that kind of played out. It's almost half the time that
Mm.
you were going into that burnout that
Mm.
led to the recovery period.
And that's, I suppose, the ultimate question is, was it worth it? And I suppose only the individual, excuse me, only the individual can answer that for themselves. But do you feel it was worth it?
Um, for a period of time, it was worth it.
Mm,
Like when I chose it and it was meaningful. I think there's a big difference between choosing it and it being meaningful for you,
mm,
with a sight of what's on the other side.
mm,
Um, you know, but like building it as a default way of living. There's,
mm,
like I grew up in a tech startup culture of hustle and go hard and, wear the badge of honor for, working really hard and those types of things. And it's like,
mm,
if you're moving yourself towards working too hard or burnout because you want to look good, you want to get promoted, you want to like, impress people, you want to wear your entrepreneur badge of honor, like I
mm.
think that's just ridiculous. If
Yes.
you work hard for a period of time that puts yourself a bit at risk for something that's really meaningful to save your company through a time of, COVID or whatever, really where we as a company, where we really messed up in the treatment of me when I went into the burnout, when I was coming out of it, I was like, right, I need to hire myself some salespeople. And I went to
Mm,
the board and I said, time to hire some salespeople. Had they hired salespeople, quite possibly I could have stuck around because I would have had the burden lifted off me and like, that time to not go so hard. But the
mm.
expectation was put on me that, oh, you've found this new level of performance, you can just maintain it. It's like,
Yes.
no, that wasn't a sustainable level of performance,
Mm,
right? And so as anyone in leadership roles or building businesses or going through tough times, it's like there needs to be give. If there's the
mm,
take time where it's like you need to step up and all of that sort of thing, then there needs to be recoil. There needs to
mm.
be nourishment time afterwards. And in like unfortunately, sometimes there's not that option. You know,
Yes.
but if there is, like, don't forgo it. Don't forgo it.
Yeah.
That's the bit where I stuffed up. That's the bit where I messed up.
Yeah, and I see this with a lot of my clients. So many of my clients are in jobs that they do really well and that they really, really love, and then situations change and staff gets reduced, and suddenly they're doing the job of three people. And I understand that that is a reality in the world, that these financial situations happen. However, it does seem to me, on observing it, that businesses are quite okay with the person stepping up and doing the job of three people
Mm.
forever. So
Yeah.
it's one thing to say, look, we've got this financial situation and for the next 6 months, for the next 3 or whatever it is, right? It's
Mm.
one thing to have an end time and at least kind of know, okay, we're going to do this, but ultimately I'm going to be rewarded for it. There's going to be some reward at the end. And then once we're able to, we're going to put staff back on, and like an awareness around what it's going to cost that person, and that it's a finite thing.
Mm. Mm.
But what I see over and over, and I can't understand why businesses do this, because they just destroy their workforce and they lose great people, is that they kind of just think, oh, well, that person's performing. We'll just leave it at that. We'll just let them do everything. And you can only sustain it for so long. And it's just so sad to see this happen, because people end up leaving jobs that they once loved, and businesses lose great employees. And yeah, I can't see how that's a sensible way of doing things. I
See,
just
the,
can't.
the thing, like the thing that I want to call out there, right?
Mm,
Um, I have a small bit of empathy for leaders who accidentally do it, right?
mm,
And the way they accidentally do it is they manage the business based on numbers.
yeah,
When you manage a business based on numbers and you're not tracking like the mental health score of your team members, and like I've seen some organizations starting to do this, and it's fantastic, right? It's starting to
mm,
become a thing that's out there in some really forward thinking organizations. But like a lot of the time, it's not. And when you just see data, you don't feel, you don't hear the tone of the voice, you don't see the
mm,
tiredness in people's eyes, you don't see the change, you don't
yes,
ask them how they're going, like how sustainable the work they're doing is, if they're loving it, if it's aligned with their career path and their
yes,
career trajectory, right? And it's like good managers who keep good people are the ones who bring that in, who
yeah.
who have that human element and monitor that just the way that they manage the numbers.
And some people are better at expressing it, and going and talking to their manager and telling them, and some people are less so. But also, some managers are more open to hearing it as well. And it is like, and I know, running my own business, I know that when you're going through really, really stressful times, sometimes you don't want to see it. because it's just all too hard and you don't know what you can do about it. So there's a bit of all of that. Like, so I do get what you're saying. It's not like evil business owner or whatever. It's just it's difficult on all sides, really.
Yeah, it
Mm.
can be, and I say that because I like to look at the world through a I believe in people lens. But the
Yes.
fact is, like some of the people that were in leadership roles there didn't, like they had the experience, right? And they were just
Yeah.
running the business on numbers and
Mm.
goals and ambition, and it's like that's that's a lot of the culture of how business has been run for a very, very long time. And the,
Yes.
the really good thing that I feel like is sort of becoming more prevalent with the younger workforce today is they're demanding like to be treated well, like,
Yes.
and they change jobs if they're not getting treated well and getting the
Mm.
growth that they want and all of these things. And sure, there are challenges, to their style of working and things like that. But the reality is there's kind of this waking up to like living a life that's meaningful and valuable to an individual versus like doing what you need to do to survive,
Yeah.
which is an
Yeah.
absolute gift of the times that we live in, that we actually have, um, the freedom to look at the world and our working lives and things like that.
Mm.
And it's kind of this evolution that leaders need to take on.
Yes. Yeah, and that is a good thing. I think they're being brought into it kicking and screaming whether they want to or not. They're going to have to embrace this. But yeah, I think it is a very different world. When I was younger, you left school and a lot of people were expected to be in the same job for the rest of their lives. And some people were, but a lot's changed in the last 30 years. So obviously for many of us, I know I had a big change in my career and I my little version of this, and I've already talked to my listeners about this, but when I was in my 20s, I had a couple of strokes and I was working for a mining company and I was doing really long hours and really, I was doing like admin, PA, whatever the role is called these days, and managing the team, the office team, that kind of thing.
Mm.
And I really, really pushed myself. And yeah, those strokes were kind of my that was my version of Fiona, you've got to do
Do
something
something
about
about
this,
it. Yeah.
and so I did, and that's kind of what led me down this path. But yeah, it's you have to. Sometimes we need to. Unfortunately, as human beings, sometimes we need to have something stop us in our tracks. But I know myself, and this is the question I want to ask you, because I know myself that when I look back on that, my body was whispering to me
Mm.
and it was getting a bit louder and getting a bit louder. And eventually I didn't listen. So I just said, right, that's it. I'm going to sort this.
Yep.
So what was your experience of that? Looking back, can you see that? Obviously, the second time you did see it because the second time you made a conscious choice around it.
Mm.
But still, there might have been some things you missed. But the first time around, in particular, was there signs and symptoms that now you look back and kind of go, okay, now I understand what to look for and what it looks like. And I think you did mention that sleep was one of the things that you
Mm.
started to have interrupted sleep. So just tell me a little bit more about the signs and symptoms that you either missed or you chose to ignore.
Yeah. So I think the sleep is a big one. One of the other things was like the wholeness of life, right?
Mm,
Like how much you're participating in those other things other than the work life, right? And
mm,
as a small business owner, that might be something that's important to you, and you put lots of hours into that and that sort of thing, right? But like those other things that are really meaningful to you, if they're reduced for a short period of time, that can work because you need to go through phases of things in your business in your life, right? But if you long term are missing out on family events, if you long term are not catching up with those meaningful friends and having those conversations, um, like I remember an event I'd booked with some of my friends like a couple of months out. We had something going on in the business and I like canceled the day of, right? And it's
mm,
like, why?
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it wasn't a
Mm,
make or break. It was like I feel like this was an important moment for the business. So I need to drop everything that's personally important to me. Like I could have participated in some sort of other supportive ways and worked that out, right? It's like, I think, friends and family sort of noticed it around me. Even, like my sort of family now sort of say to me, oh, wow, geez, you look different than you did, when you were
mm,
in your previous business. Like
mm,
that's amazing. Like I can see it on you.
mm,
So watch out for those like when your nan says, oh, you're looking a bit skinny, Peter. You know, it's like, oh, right. Okay, am I? Is that her calling out that I'm looking tired or I'm looking sick? Or like,
Mm.
like friends and family will notice those kind of physical things that you don't see because you're living in your body
Yes.
day by day, right?
Mm.
And focused on the things that you are. So I think there's like clues from those that know you, particularly have known you for a long time, and they're like,
Mm.
hey, you okay? Or, they
Yes.
make some comments that those comments habitually you want to ignore because it's kind of confronting to face them.
Mm.
But that to me is a really good litmus test. That with the sleep, with like, are you actually living a meaningful life? And is what I'm doing now, does it feel sustainable
Mm.
for me, not for
Mm.
the standards of everybody else, because they might be working more hours, but they're just naturally built in a way that can handle that, or that's aligned with what's really important to them, or it's not so stressful for them, or they're going to burn themselves out too. So hey, why are you comparing yourself to them? It's like, find what works for you.
Yes.
And the only way you do that is through a bit of trial and error, right? And so when you do sort of press up against those boundaries, go over them a little bit, getting that recovery and then learning from it and building that into your way of living going forward, I think
Mm.
is really important.
Yeah. And, are you working to live or are you living to work?
Mm.
And that's what it comes down to as well. I don't know if you can hear in the background, but this microphone's pretty good. But I live near the RAF base in
Oh, yeah.
out near Richmond in Hawkesbury, and there's a few planes going over at the moment, but it's not too bad. I don't know if it'll come out in the audio, but I'm noticing it. That's all right. It's fun. It's fun having these little challenges. At least it's not the jets. It's the other kind, the Hercules. They don't make as much noise as those jets. When the jets come down here to practice, you really can hear it. But yeah, look, I think that it is important. Your family have the best insight, and I think it's good to listen to them and to those people around you. And when you said that, what happens is you kind of were letting down friends and not spending time with friends, and then you end up more disconnected, and also you're just not doing anything that brings you joy. And I know even if your job does bring you joy, there's got to be other things as well. And I think by that point, your job probably wasn't bringing you joy anyway.
So that's actually calling that out, I think, is really important, right? Like, I love working. Like, I get a kick out of it. What I do feels meaningful.
Mm,
Um, but there's a point where that shifts.
yeah,
There's too much overwhelm going on that it becomes about the objective and not about the enjoyment.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so that, I think, is a really good, if you do enjoy what you do, some people just work for, getting their paycheck and their life is the rest of their meaning, right? And that's great.
mm,
But if you're on this place where you're trying to open yourself up, really care about the work that you do and that type of thing, right? Like noticing where that joy, starts reducing from your work, because I don't want to work a whole bunch of hours if I'm not enjoying it. If I am enjoying it, then great, right? It's not going to take as much of a toll on me, and I'm going to produce good results. And it's like, that's something I've always been searching for in my work,
mm, yeah.
and I think is really important.
And if you start feeling resentful, there's a clue there that and you don't really want to go to work. There's a clue in that maybe something shifted,
Mm,
even if it
mm.
was your favorite job in the world, or you love your business, something
Or it
shifted.
used to be. Just because it used
Exactly.
to be doesn't mean it still is, right? Because in
Yeah.
that second business, it was like, I've found a zone in my life that was probably one of the best that I'd ever had for about a 6 or 7 month period there. And that was shortly followed by a whole bunch of stuff changing and it turning to a burnout cage
Mm,
slowly, almost like without realizing. And it was like, but I've loved this. This has been so good. I enjoy this. Like,
mm,
what's going on? And all of a sudden it's changed. And being okay that things change and that this, might not be what it once was, and accepting that sometimes that can really take a while to sort of
mm.
sink in. And if you realize that earlier, the sooner the better.
Yeah, well, that really is a life skill in all things, whether it is in regards to your health in general, whether it's in regards to your work life, your jobs, your relationships, whatever it is. It's
Mm,
actually about kind of just reassessing, because we put ourselves in a situation, we set ourselves up and we say, oh, I'm having a great time. And we don't reassess that, so many years later, I'm on this board, or I'm a volunteer at this thing, or I do this and I hate going there. Don't like the
mm,
people, I don't like being there, or whatever it is, or it's just reassessing things on a regular basis, rather than, life is not a set and forget thing. Things change and relationships change, and maybe your workplace changes, maybe you change, and it's kind of just reassessing as you go.
mm.
Yeah. And look, the last question I want to ask you, because we're running a bit longer, but that's okay. I've done an hour before, so really it's not that long. But I don't want this to be that long. It doesn't need to be. So the question I have for you is: so we've talked about the burnout that you've experienced, and we've talked about some of the signs and symptoms. But what are some of the strategies that you put in place to help you recover? And some of the strategies that still now that you have in place are some of the self care that you practice now to ensure that you don't go back there.
Yeah, it's a good call out. So that first health retreat that I asked my mum to book me in was a yoga retreat all those years ago. That's become an absolute staple for me.
Mm,
Like I really believe in yoga. It kind of People say to me, "Oh, do you get super flexible and can you do these things?" I don't do yoga for that. Like
mm,
you do yoga because you walk out of there and this is clearer than what it was when you walked in. Your
yeah.
mind, you think clearer, your emotions are clearer. The
Mm,
world makes just that little bit more sense, and having a regular practice of yoga has been really, really cool.
mm,
um, Going the extra level, which is what I kind of needed to do, particularly after the first burnout, was my diet was really not great, and like physically, like I needed more than just a bit of yoga. So I got into something called Ayurveda. It's
mm,
known as a sister science of yoga. I know you're familiar with it. I guess if for anyone listening who's not familiar with it, it's kind of like an Indian version of a naturopath, or an Indian version of Chinese medicine. It's grounded in a lot of cool stuff over thousands of years. It does take a little bit longer to work than the average Western piece of medicine, but it's quite good for you in the long term, and very personalized. The approach. It's not like, hey, you have this symptom, here's this. It's like, hey, you have this symptom, you have this makeup of your body. Here's how you go and set things up to be supportive of you, whether that's your diet, the type of yoga you do, the type of meditation you do, other different things that really allow you to set yourself up in a sustainable way for your health and recovery. And so that was really key in mine. Actually, I remember I got right into yoga, and I really struggled to meditate for quite some time. And I got given a specific breath meditation from my Ayurvedic doctor based on my symptoms and my body type, and that allowed me to do my first 5-minute meditation. I was like,
great.
that worked.
Yeah.
Okay. And it
Mm,
like started, and now I've done like multi-day silent meditation retreats and all sorts of things because I got quite into it.
mm,
Um, but it all started from there. It's like, what's that one step that I can take? What's that one next thing that I can do to improve my health? And it was just like,
mm,
okay, one step at a time, committing to that as a priority in my life. Like I went
mm,
from, drinking almost every weekend to like not drinking for 6 months. And my friends were like,
mm,
what's wrong with you? But I still socialized with them. They still accepted me because they were true friends, right?
mm,
So there's a lot of different things to try, but I'd suggest finding your thing. If that's yoga, Pilates, going for runs, whatever, find your thing,
mm.
and support your physicality, as well as your mind and your emotions in that
Yeah.
recovery journey.
And it's not always the first thing you find. It's exactly what you said, find your thing.
Mm,
So you just got to find, what blend of different therapies or different activities work for us. And even you're saying before, you were talking about the meditation and you're sort of saying a 5-minute meditation. I think it's important to note that I think that sometimes people feel like the wellness means, I don't know, they watch all these people on Instagram or something and they think it means, doing yoga on a mountain in a bikini, for 3 hours and the green fasting, whatever, whatever. And
yep.
look, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. However, in people's normal everyday lives, the reality is for a lot of people, especially people that relate to this sort of this work, working long hours, and so many people have, they've got families, and they've got the children, and then they've got the aging parents, and they've got all of the things going on. It's good to know that you can do 5-minute things as well. So it's just about lots of little habits that you can do, and if you can do those other extra things, amazing. But you don't have to, have the Lululemon activewear and, which is like $300 or whatever. So, and, be at some fancy place or join some expensive place or anything like that. There's a lot of things you can do, just little apps on your phone or whatever, that's like 5 minutes here or 5 minutes there, or just a simple tweak to your diet where you're having a bit more protein or a bit more green stuff, whatever. a lot of wellness stuff is actually sort of quite simple and small and doable. And I
Mm.
think it's understanding that if we approach it from that place and just baby steps, baby steps, baby steps, we get there. Whereas if we kind of think, oh, it means I'm going to have to just change everything tomorrow and I'm going to have to be perfect and do it perfectly. And of course, people who are prone to burnout are people who are probably a bit prone to perfection as well. And so then when they do the wellness, they want to do the wellness with perfection. And it's like, that's the whole thing that caused the burnout in the first place, part of that sort of attitude. You don't do the wellness with perfection. It's okay to be perfectly imperfect, you know?
I'll give one really quick example,
Yeah.
which is part of why yoga has been so powerful for me. One of the first classes I ever did at the yoga retreat, like I was 22 at the time,
Yes.
ex-athlete, like had trained all during my teenage years,
Mm.
like, and I rocked up at this yoga retreat and there was a woman, gray hair, could have been 50, 60 years old, right? Leading this class, like, and we were doing yoga and we're like an hour into this hour and a half class and I am struggling. Like
Mm.
I'm like shaking, trying to hold these poses and she just looks zen as anything, right? And
Yeah.
I was like, it was the first time in my life I'd sat there and gone, oh, I don't, I, I don't have to compete at this.
Mm.
Like yoga's not about competing to be the stretchiest, flexiblest,
Mm.
doing the best position of this, that, or whatever. And I've
Yes.
been doing it for like years and years and years now. And I'm not the best, looking yogi,
Mm.
but I walk out of there feeling good. And that's the objective, right? The
Yes.
objective is to show up and be there and be present and be with yourself, whatever that looks like. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be right.
Yeah.
And, whether you find that in yoga or something else, I think having a place in your life where you don't have to be on, perfect, right, doing well, achieving
Mm.
whatever, that's a really fundamental thing, I think, in the recovery journey.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I think that's a perfect way of sort of bringing this to an end. Is really it's self care. Is that it's showing up for yourself, and showing up for yourself looks like doing what you need, and it's only about you, and it's only about you maintaining, looking after your own health, whatever your goals are, whatever you need. It's not about anyone else, and I think that we get so caught up in all the other stuff. So just really that showing up for yourself, really powerful stuff.
100%.
Yeah.
Thanks, Fiona.
So thank you so much, Pete. I've really enjoyed this. It's a great story, and I think it's really a really important story because I see this happening all around me with business people, and I think it's important to understand that you can see signs and symptoms. You can practice self care in small ways, and you can avoid the burnout. Or there's a lot of things you can do to help you if you do end up in that situation. But it's just having that, just being aware of a lot of these things makes a big difference. So, if anyone wants to get in contact with you, how can they find you?
LinkedIn's a really good way. So
Mhm.
search Pete Solway. My business is Founder Sales Solution, so you'll see that slapped across my LinkedIn.
Okay.
That's a great way. If you want to check out my website and what I do, which is around building sales functions for small business owners in a really sustainable way that feels good and helps you hit meaningful goals, not just growth goals that you're supposed to hit because you've got a
Mhm.
business. You can go to foundersalessolution.com.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. Now, anyone who's listening or watching, could you please like, subscribe, share? If you get value from this, I would really appreciate if you do that for me so that I can get more listeners and more people watching it. And I hope you really did get value from today. Thanks again, Pete.
Thanks, Fiona. Appreciate it.
And I'll talk to you all next time. Thank you. Bye.